Okay, when I say fungus, what comes to mind? Probably a mushroom, right? But the real action is happening underground. There's this massive hidden world called the mycelial network. And for the longest time, we just thought of it as, a simple root system for slurping up nutrients. But what if it's so much more than that? What if it's kind of like a biological internet, buzzing with information? Today, we're going to dig into a really cool scientific paper that looks at the very bones of these networks to ask a huge question. Are we literally walking on top of nature's best-kept secret? All right, so let's get right into it. If we want to figure out if fungi can actually communicate, we first have to wrap our heads around the incredible kingdom they've built. This unbelievably complex web of life that basically holds entire ecosystems together.
Okay, just look at this thing. Seriously. This isn't some abstract art piece. Nope, this is a real fungal network, something researchers spent ages mapping out. It kind of looks chaotic, right? Almost like a lightning strike that's been frozen in time. You can see that dense center and then all these super fine tendrils just reaching out into the unknown. This right here, this is the physical structure we're trying to crack. And honestly, it's just amazing to look at.
So this brings us right to the heart of the mystery. We know for a fact these pathways are moving water and nutrients around, like a plumbing system. But here's the big question. Could they also be working like wires, carrying signals, maybe electrical or chemical ones? Well, this paper basically treats this whole thing like a detective story, and the very first clues, they're hidden in the network's design itself. Okay, so you're probably wondering, how on earth do you even start to analyze something this complicated? Well, you start with the data. Lots of it. The researchers didn't just look at one or two of these things. No, they built a whole library of them, trying to find the hidden rules, the blueprint for how they're built. And we're not talking about a small sample size here. This whole analysis is based on a massive data set, get this, of 270 different fungal networks that were all mapped out in experiments. That number, 270, gives their findings some serious statistical muscle. It tells us we're looking at a real, repeatable pattern, not just some random fluke.
Now, what's super interesting here is the contrast you see. On the left, yeah, the networks are all over the place in terms of size. Some have just a few dozen connection points, others have over 2,000. But then you look to the right and you see something incredibly consistent. Almost every connection point only links up to 2 or 3 other branches. So what does that tell us? It tells us the local wiring, the basic building block, is almost always this simple, sparse branching pattern. It doesn't matter how huge the network gets.
And that consistency, that's no accident. It's pointing to something pretty profound. These fungal networks are basically masterpieces of natural engineering. They've been optimized by evolution to solve a really fundamental problem. And a design this efficient isn't just about surviving. It might be our very first clue that these networks are built for something way more complex than just shuffling food from A to B. And what is that fundamental problem? It's a classic trade-off, one that every engineer deals with. On one hand, you've got your wiring cost. Every single strand, every connection costs energy and resources to build and then to maintain. But on the other hand, you need transport efficiency. The network has to be connected enough to zip resources and, hey, maybe signals around super quickly. It's a balancing act. If you build too little, you starve. But if you build too much, you're just wasting energy you can't afford. So how do fungi solve this puzzle? Well, it turns out brilliantly. Check this out. This graph is showing that as a network gets bigger, its total wiring cost actually goes up slower than its size. Think about that for a second. It's like for every new branch they add, the cost of adding that branch gets a tiny bit cheaper. They literally get more cost-effective the bigger they get. It's a perfect example of a natural economy of scale, and that is a massive advantage. And here you can see that trade-off in action. It's so clear. The data points show this unmistakable pattern. The networks with a lower wiring cost, that's the ones over on the left side of the graph, they tend to have a higher global efficiency. It's perfect confirmation that these fungi are constantly, actively balancing those two competing needs. Okay, but this is the real showstopper right here. That red line you see, that's something called a Pareto frontier. The best way to think of it is as the absolute limit of what is physically possible. It's like the world record for achieving the perfect balance between low cost and high efficiency. Now, look where the real fungal networks are clustered. They are pushed right up against that line. This means they aren't just good designs, they are pretty much optimal designs. They are operating at the absolute peak of what's even possible. All right, so let's recap. We've established that the network is this incredibly efficient, almost perfect piece of biological hardware.
So, the next logical question in our little detective story has to be, does that hardware run any software? I mean, can it actually transmit coordinated signals? To try and answer that, the researchers turned to computer simulations. They used a tool called the Kuramoto model. Now, that might sound complicated, but the easiest way to get it is to think about fireflies. Imagine a whole field of fireflies, all flashing randomly. This model can actually predict if and how they'll eventually start to flash in sync, just based on how they can see and influence each other. So in this case, instead of fireflies, the scientists put virtual oscillators, think of them as little flashing lights, all over the real map of the fungal network. They wanted to see if the network's shape alone could get them to sync up. And here's what they found. That line going up on the graph, that represents coherence, basically how synchronized the whole network is. And you can see that as the simulation runs, coherence starts to emerge from the chaos. A coordinated rhythm actually starts to build across the entire network. So here's the key takeaway. The physical layout, the very shape of the fungal network, is totally capable of supporting this kind of coordinated, communication-like behavior. But, and this is a really, really important but, we have to be super clear here. This is a computer simulation. It's a what-if scenario. It proves that the network's architecture could support this kind of synchronization. It makes it possible. But it does not prove that fungi are actually doing this out in the forest. To know that for sure, you need a real-world experiment. And honestly, this is where the paper makes what might be its most important contribution. It doesn't come out and say we have the final answer. Instead, what it does is provide a detailed, super rigorous blueprint for how scientists can actually go out and find that answer. I mean, the authors say it themselves. Their goal was to provide a topology-guided framework. That's science speak for, hey, we used our analysis of the network's shape, its topology, to design a much smarter, more targeted experiment that can test for this communication directly. And this is that blueprint. It's a beautifully simple 5-step process. Step 1. Grow fungal colonies with different shapes. Step 2. Map their exact network structure, just like those images we saw earlier. Step 3. You apply a little stimulus to one part of the network, like you poke it with a tiny pulse of light. Step 4. You put electrodes on a totally different part of the network and you just listen for a response. And finally, step 5. You compare whatever you find against controls, like a dead network, just to make absolutely sure you're seeing a real biological signal and not just noise. So the key idea here, the hypothesis that ties this all together, is this. Does the network's shape, its geometry, its efficiency, its cost, does that actually predict how well a signal gets through? Because if it does, if the shape predicts the signal strength, well, that would be some seriously powerful evidence for real information processing. So where does that leave us? Well, we're basically standing on the edge of a potentially huge discovery. This paper doesn't prove that fungi can talk, but what it does, brilliantly, is show us that their networks are perfectly built for it. And now it's given us the tools to finally listen in. Which leaves us with one last mind-bending question to chew on. If we do find proof of information processing in an organism that doesn't have a single neuron, what does that do to our very definition of intelligence?